He lived a quiet life in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nothing much ever happened. He had moved there a few years ago, hoping to leave the chaos of his past behind. People in the town saw him as calm, polite, and unassuming. He kept to himself mostly, working regular hours at a small auto repair shop on the edge of town. He had a routine and he liked it that way. Life was predictable, safe, and peaceful, or so he thought. From the outside he looked ordinary. Medium height, strong build, with eyes that seemed to quietly measure everything around him. Most people didn't think much about him beyond that. But inside he carried years of experience that very few could imagine. He had been trained to handle situations most people couldn't even picture. He had seen things that changed the way he thought about danger, fear, and survival. But those days were behind him. Or so he believed. The town, however, had its own problems. There was a group of people who clung to old, bitter beliefs. They didn't like outsiders, and they didn't like anyone who was different from them. Their presence was a shadow over the town, though many tried to ignore them. They whispered in corners, spread rumors, and made life difficult for anyone they considered not like them. He first noticed their attention a few months after he moved in. At first it was subtle, people staring a little too long, whispers that stopped when he walked by, and strange glances from the men who gathered in the local diner. He tried to ignore it. He had no interest in confrontation. He liked his quiet life too much to risk it. But as time went on, the glances became more deliberate, and the whispers started to take shape in more direct actions. One morning, he walked out of his small apartment to find his mailbox torn open. Letters had been scattered, some torn to pieces as if someone wanted to make a point. He didn't panic, though he felt the first real tug of unease in months. He picked up the pieces, carefully studying them. Most were blank. Some had crude words scrawled in red ink. He didn't respond. That was never his way. He kept calm, and he waited, observing quietly. At the auto shop, he worked as he always did. He knew how to fix cars, but he also knew how to read people. His customers were friendly enough, and he had earned respect for his honesty and skill. Yet he could sense the tension when some members of the local clan came in. They treated him like a stranger in his own town. They made comments thinly veiled as jokes about how he didn't belong there. Most people would have reacted angrily, but he simply nodded, smiled politely, and went back to work. Inside, he was assessing. Every move, every word, every glance. He had been trained to notice patterns, to predict actions. The memory of his time in the military was always just below the surface, guiding him in subtle ways. He didn't need to act yet. Patience was one of the most powerful tools he had. The more they underestimated him, the better, but the clan was growing bolder. One night, as he returned home from the shop, he noticed tire tracks near his apartment that didn't belong there. Someone had been watching. He didn't confront them directly. Instead, he memorized the tracks, the direction they came from, and the faint smell of gasoline and smoke lingering in the air. Small details most people would overlook. Details that told him a story about who they were and what they might be planning. His neighbors noticed the tension too. Some tried to warn him in their own way, hinting that trouble was near, but they didn't know him well. They didn't know that beneath his calm exterior, he had faced dangers that most could only read about in books. He smiled and thanked them, careful not to reveal too much. He didn't want anyone else dragged into what might be coming. He spent that night awake, moving quietly in his apartment, checking doors, windows, and every possible entry point. He wasn't afraid. Fear was something he understood and controlled. He knew that panic could be fatal. Instead, he made plans, small, deliberate preparations just in case. He reinforced locks, adjusted the positions of objects in his apartment to block access if necessary, and thought through escape routes. Not because he wanted to fight, but because he knew that survival sometimes required strategy over strength. The days that followed were tense. The clan's harassment increased. They left messages on his car, crude symbols drawn on the walls near his apartment, and even attempted small acts of intimidation at the shop. Most of it was cowardice, bold only because they thought he couldn't respond. But he responded in his own way, by observing, learning, and preparing. Every encounter was noted, every pattern remembered. He also began helping quietly in small ways. He made sure neighbors knew to lock doors. He moved certain objects in ways that seemed ordinary but were actually protective. Some people began to notice that something about him was different, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. He had a presence that demanded respect without asking for it. It wasn't fear he inspired, it was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from someone who knows exactly what they are doing. Despite the tension, life had moments of ordinary peace. He liked walking in the early mornings when the town was still quiet, watching the sun rise over the fields and listening to the faint sounds of birds waking up. Those moments reminded him why he had chosen this life, why he wanted peace, why he wanted to escape the chaos of the past, and he clung to those moments, using them to calm his mind and sharpen his focus. Yet the shadow of the clan never fully left him. Every time he saw their trucks parked too close, or noticed one of them lingering in the diner, he remembered the danger they represented. And he remembered that he was no ordinary man. They did not know what he was capable of. They did not know that under this quiet exterior was a trained mind, a body conditioned to handle extreme situations, a man who had led teams through some of the most dangerous missions imaginable. The clan, blinded by prejudice and arrogance, believed that fear or intimidation could control him. They had no idea that they were dealing with someone who had mastered patience, strategy, and timing. They thought they were strong, but strength alone was never enough. They underestimated the man's intelligence, his calm, and his experience. Then came the first real sign that they were planning something bigger. One evening, as he walked home, he noticed someone watching from the edge of the street, hiding in shadows. The way they moved, the careful spacing, the signals they gave to others, it was clear. This was not random. They were preparing for confrontation. He didn't react immediately. He simply observed, noted, and let them reveal their plans through their actions. This was how he worked. He didn't act hastily. He didn't need to. He had learned over years that patience often won battles before they even began. By allowing the clan to make mistakes, he gained an advantage without them ever realizing it. As he reached his apartment that night, he paused. He could feel the tension in the air, a quiet warning that something was coming. He locked the door behind him and went about his preparations as calm and deliberate as ever. The town outside slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing quietly on its edges. And inside he was ready, not because he wanted violence, but because he knew survival required awareness, skill, and readiness. This was only the beginning. The days after the first signs of real danger passed slowly. He went about his routine, working at the shop, fixing cars and helping customers with the same calm focus as always. But he felt it, something heavy in the air, a quiet tension that refused to leave. Every sound, every movement, every glance felt sharper. Even the wind seemed to carry warnings. The clan had not given up. Their small acts of harassment were turning bolder. One morning, he found his car tires slashed. It was not an accident. Someone had waited for the cover of night to do it, to send a message. Yet instead of anger or panic, he felt a steady, controlled awareness. He examined the damage carefully. There were fingerprints, marks, and small details left behind, all of which told a story if you knew how to read them. He filed them in his mind, storing every piece of information. The next day at the shop, the men from the clan came in. They laughed loud and forced, trying to make him feel unwelcome. They mocked him, pretending to be friendly, but the tone was heavy with malice. Most people would have reacted angrily, but he did not. He nodded politely, smiled faintly, and returned to his work. While they tried to intimidate him with words, he measured each of them quietly. He noticed their habits, their gestures, the way they avoided looking directly at him when he spoke. Every detail mattered. The townspeople were beginning to notice the tension too. A few neighbors whispered among themselves, worried about what might happen. Some suggested he should move, leave the town while he still could. Others thought he might fight back, though they did not understand the full extent of his skills. He appreciated their concern, but knew that hiding was not the solution. He would not run from those who underestimated him. The clan's actions escalated further. One evening, as he returned from the shop, he noticed that his front door had been forced slightly open. The lock was scratched, though it had not been broken. It was a clear warning. Someone had been inside while he was away. He did not panic. Instead, he quietly examined the entry points, checking for traces or footprints. He found faint marks in the dust, a smudge of mud that led away from the door, and small scuffs on the floorboards. They had tried to scare him, but he had been ready. He spent the next hours thinking, planning. There was no need to act violently yet, but preparation was critical. He reinforced the locks, rearranged furniture to block potential entrances, and created small obstacles in strategic places. Nothing looked out of place, but everything was deliberate. He had learned long ago that survival depended not on panic, but on control and careful planning. At work, he remained calm, though his senses were sharper than ever. He noticed unusual glances, movements out of the corner of his eyes, and subtle signals he could not ignore. The clan was watching, learning, planning. Their arrogance made them careless, and that carelessness was his advantage. He kept track of them without revealing his intentions, letting their ignorance become their own trap. Then came the first direct threat. One afternoon, a note appeared on his car windshield. It was crude and threatening, filled with hateful language demanding that he leave town immediately. Most people would have been shaken, maybe frightened. But he read it calmly, studying every word, every stroke of the pen. It revealed the writer's mindset, their level of planning, and their overconfidence. He folded the note, put it in his pocket, and moved on. Fear was useless. Awareness was power. The next few nights were tense. He slept lightly, always alert to the slightest sound outside his apartment. He memorized the positions of shadows, the patterns of light, the rhythm of footsteps. Every detail, no matter how small, could be a warning or an advantage. He moved quietly, checking windows and doors repeatedly. This vigilance was exhausting, but it was necessary. Survival was not about luck. It was about preparation, and he was ready to prepare to the fullest. He also began helping the neighbors in subtle ways. He noticed a few people who seemed nervous about leaving their homes at night. Without announcing it, he offered small protections, moving objects to block entrances, securing doors, and leaving little signs that warned them to be careful. The neighbors began to feel safer, though they did not fully understand why. They only knew that he was different, that there was a calm authority about him that made them trust him without question. Meanwhile, the clan grew bolder. They began gathering in groups, watching him from a distance, trying to figure out how to confront him without being challenged. They underestimated him completely. They thought that by showing numbers, by intimidating him, they could force him out. But they did not understand patience, strategy, or skill. They did not know who they were dealing with. One night, as he returned from closing the shop, he noticed someone lurking near the alley behind his apartment. They froze when they saw him, as if they had been caught in the act. He did not speak. He did not rush. He simply observed, watching their stance, the way their shoulders tightened, the faint tremble in their hands. They were not ready for him. They were inexperienced, overconfident, and reckless. He continued walking, pretending not to notice. But he memorized everything, the way they moved, the path they had taken, and the faint sounds of communication. Every tiny detail would matter later. Every mistake they made now would become their undoing. He had learned long ago that power often lay not in brute strength, but in knowledge and timing. The clan's arrogance reached a peak when they tried to corner him in the parking lot one evening. They blocked his car, surrounding him with sneers and laughter. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have reacted rashly. He, however, remained calm. He measured distances, counted attackers, and noted possible escape routes. He assessed the environment, the car doors, the surrounding walls, even the placement of nearby objects that could be used strategically. They approached him with taunting words, trying to provoke anger, trying to force him into a fight he could easily win, but he did not react. He let them talk, let them reveal their plans through words and gestures. Each movement, each slip, each overconfident step was recorded in his mind. They were making mistakes because they thought he was just an ordinary man. They had no idea what he was capable of. After they finally left, satisfied that they had intimidated him, he took note of everything. The angle they had come from, the position of the streetlights, the sound of their cars leaving, all would become useful information later. He prepared for what he knew was coming. The attacks would not stop. If anything, they would grow bolder. And he would be ready, not because he wanted conflict, but because he valued life and understood the importance of survival. Even as the danger grew, he found moments of peace. He walked early in the mornings when the town was still quiet, listening to birds, feeling the crisp air. Those moments reminded him why he chose this life, why he wanted calm and ordinary days. They reminded him that no matter the threat, some parts of life remained untainted, untouched by hate and violence. But he never let his guard down. The clan's hate was dangerous because it was unpredictable. One day it might be minor harassment. The next, it could become deadly. He knew that patience, observation, and careful preparation were his greatest weapons. They would not see the full extent of his abilities until the moment it mattered most. And when that time came, they would regret underestimating him completely. The nights were the hardest. Every sound outside, every movement in the shadows kept him alert. He slept lightly, always ready to move, to react, to protect himself. Fear did not control him, but awareness did. He had survived far worse situations before, situations most people could never imagine, and those experiences, though in the past, gave him a confidence that could not be shaken by threats or intimidation. Slowly, he began to recognize a pattern in the clan's actions. They were testing him, trying to find a weakness, a way to exploit what they thought was ordinary. He let them. Every step they took, every move they made was recorded, analyzed, and stored. The more they pushed, the more they revealed, and the more prepared he became. By the end of this period, the tension in the town was palpable. People whispered about the quiet man who did not react to threats, who seemed untouchable. Some were afraid, some were curious. He remained calm, approachable, and polite, showing no hint of the power he carried within. The clan, in contrast, grew frustrated and impatient. They could not understand why their intimidation had no effect. They could not see that the man they targeted was calculating, waiting, and ready for what was to come. And so the stage was set. The clan's hatred was growing, their plans becoming bolder and their arrogance blinding them to the truth. Meanwhile, he remained patient, calm, and observant, knowing that soon the situation would reach a turning point. He was prepared not just for defense but for control. He knew the game they were playing, and he was ready to win it, in the way only someone with his experience could. The night the attack came, the air was unusually still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the tension that had been building for weeks. He had noticed signs all day: unfamiliar cars parked too long on side streets, shadows lingering where they had no reason to be, and distant sounds that were too rhythmic, too deliberate to be coincidence. The clan had finally made their move. He was ready. He had been ready, in fact, from the moment he realized that their harassment would not stop. He had studied them, memorized their patterns, their movements, and their arrogance, and now, as darkness fell, he knew it was time to test their assumptions. The first indication of danger came from a sound so subtle most people would have ignored it: a soft crunch of gravel underfoot. He was outside, walking along the path that led to his apartment. Normally, he would have taken the shortcut through the alley, but tonight he moved differently, aware of every shadow and every angle. He stopped, crouched slightly, and scanned the area. Nothing moved. Yet he knew instinctively that someone was there. Moments later, a figure emerged from the shadows, bold and careless. The man stepped into the faint light, smirking, thinking he had the upper hand. He had underestimated his target completely. The clan thought numbers, intimidation, and hatred would be enough. They did not know that patience and training often outweighed brute force. He spoke first, his voice calm and measured. "You should go home," he said. There was no threat in his tone, only certainty. The man froze, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He had expected fear, anger, or hesitation. Instead, he saw a man completely in control, unshaken and confident. The others followed, emerging from hidden spots surrounding him. There were 6 in total. They moved with a mix of arrogance and hesitation, thinking they were clever, thinking they had planned well. But their movements were predictable. He had studied them long enough to know every weakness they would reveal simply by acting on impulse. When they made their first move, it was sloppy, uncoordinated. One step too close, another overextended, a third hesitated at the wrong moment. Each mistake was a gift, each misstep a window of opportunity. He did not rush. He observed, adjusted, and prepared to act with precision. The first attack came as a shove, quick and unthinking. He stepped aside unbothered, using the attacker's own momentum to unbalance him. The man stumbled, tripping over a curb, and fell to the ground. It was enough to buy time, enough to create space. He did not strike in anger. He struck only when necessary, carefully, efficiently, and deliberately. Another man lunged, trying to grab him from behind. He twisted, barely moving, and redirected the momentum. The attacker crashed into a nearby car door with a thud that echoed through the silent street. The remaining 4 hesitated, their confidence faltering. They had not expected resistance, not in this form, not from someone who seemed so ordinary. He moved with controlled speed, never reckless, never wasting energy. Each motion was deliberate, calculated. He disarmed one attacker, using the man's own strength against him. Another tried to flank him, but he anticipated the move, sidestepping and guiding him away from the group. Within moments, the attackers were struggling, confused, and disoriented. They had expected chaos, but what they got was precision. Despite the confrontation, he never lost sight of survival over vengeance. He was not here to punish them. He was here to protect himself and ensure that the threat ended efficiently. His goal was clear: neutralize the danger without unnecessary harm. Each move, each reaction, was informed by training, experience, and careful thought. The attackers began to panic, realizing that their plan had failed. Fear replaced arrogance, and with fear came mistakes. One tried to retreat but slipped on the wet pavement, falling awkwardly. Another froze, unsure where to turn as he realized every path was accounted for. The clan had assumed numbers would give them power, but they had underestimated intelligence, skill, and calm under pressure. He saw an opening and acted. Not in anger, but with authority. He forced the attackers into a corner, leaving only one clear exit. It was not cruel. It was strategic. He wanted them to understand that they were not in control, that hatred and recklessness could be stopped without chaos, that survival often depended on thinking before acting. When the last attacker finally fled, stumbling over the uneven ground, he stood alone, breathing steadily, calm and composed. The street was quiet again, except for the faint hum of distant cars. He surveyed the scene, noting the positions of the men, the marks they had left, and the mistakes they had made. Each detail would be stored, remembered, and later used if necessary. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel relief. It was not triumph or pride, but a quiet acknowledgement that he had faced danger and handled it. He had faced those who sought to intimidate and had emerged in control. But he did not let the moment linger too long. The clan would return. They always did. The question was not whether, but when and in what form. He returned to his apartment quietly, moving as though nothing had happened. To any observer, he would appear calm, composed, and unbothered. But inside, his mind was already planning, analyzing, and preparing. He would adjust his routines, reinforce his defenses, and anticipate their next moves. The lesson he had shown tonight was clear. He was not weak, he was not afraid, and he could not be intimidated. The following day at the shop, life seemed normal on the surface. Customers came and went, conversations flowed, and the routine carried on. But he could feel the tension lingering in the town. Some noticed the marks from the night before, the overturned trash can, the disturbed gravel, the faint signs of struggle. Whispers began to spread quietly, the kind that traveled without anyone claiming responsibility. People were curious, wary, and unsettled. The clan, meanwhile, regrouped in secret. They were humiliated, frustrated, and angry. Their plan had failed, and they had underestimated the man they sought to threaten. Their arrogance had blinded them, and now they faced a harsh truth. The quiet man they targeted was far more capable than they could imagine. Panic began to creep into their ranks. They started arguing among themselves, blaming one another, showing cracks in their unity. He did not celebrate this division, but he noted it. Every misstep they made, every flaw in their planning, every moment of hesitation was useful. He was patient, knowing that the right time would come to fully neutralize the threat. He understood that fear could be a tool, not just a reaction, and he would use it wisely. At home that night, he reflected on the confrontation. He reviewed every detail in his mind, the movements, the timing, the mistakes, the successes. He considered how the situation might evolve, and he made small adjustments to his environment. Locks were reinforced, windows secured, and everyday objects were arranged strategically. He was not paranoid. He was prepared. He also allowed himself a moment to remember why he had chosen this life. Quiet streets, small routines, and simple pleasures were what he valued most. He had once lived in chaos, danger, and uncertainty. Those days had taught him to remain calm, observant, and deliberate. Now that experience allowed him to survive and protect himself without needing to resort to unnecessary violence. The next days were tense, but quieter. The clan had retreated temporarily, shaken by their failure. They were cautious now, watching from a distance, unsure of how to approach. He in turn continued his routine, calm and controlled, knowing that observation and patience were as important as action. Neighbors began noticing subtle changes too. He moved differently, spoke with quiet authority, and seemed to anticipate events before they happened. People were curious, some were nervous, and a few whispered about his skills. But he remained approachable, helpful, and polite. He did not need to reveal the depth of his abilities. Actions spoke louder than words, and he preferred to show restraint and intelligence over aggression. The first major confrontation had come and passed, but the story was far from over. The clan had learned a valuable lesson, though it was one they would not admit. They had seen that their hatred and arrogance could be defeated without chaos, that strength alone was not enough, and that patience and skill could turn the tide. He, on the other hand, had proven something to himself as well. He had remained calm under pressure, observed carefully, and acted decisively when necessary. He had demonstrated that experience, intelligence, and preparation were far more valuable than brute force or intimidation, and he knew that the next encounter would require even more careful planning. The night settled over the town once more, quiet, still, and tense. He looked out his window at the streets below, alert and aware, ready for whatever would come next. He knew the clan would not give up, that their hatred would not easily be extinguished, but he also knew that he had the advantage of calm, skill, and the patience to strike only when the moment was right. This was not just survival, it was strategy, and he was in complete control. The morning after the confrontation, the town seemed quiet, but he knew better. Danger had not disappeared. It had only changed form. The clan had retreated, but their failure had only made them more determined. Their hatred had turned into obsession. They were no longer just trying to intimidate him. They were planning, scheming, and hoping to find any way to regain control. He moved through the day with calm precision, as always. At the shop, he worked with quiet focus, greeting customers, repairing vehicles, and keeping an eye on the town outside. Every sound mattered: the click of a door, the rustle of papers, the distant hum of an engine. He could feel the tension building even when no one else noticed it. The clan began making mistakes almost immediately. They sent small groups to check on him, but they were sloppy. One left fingerprints on his property, another tripped on uneven pavement, and a third made a noise that gave him a clear warning. Each misstep was useful, another piece of information in a puzzle he was quietly completing. He didn't need to confront them yet. Their mistakes were teaching him more than any direct encounter could. He also noticed the change in their behavior. They were no longer confident. Their arrogance had been replaced by paranoia. They whispered in corners, glanced over their shoulders, and argued among themselves. Each mistake they made caused friction. They didn't trust one another. Their unity, once their strength, was breaking down. He observed quietly, taking mental notes. He knew that fear and division were as powerful as any physical force. In the evenings, he walked the quiet streets as he always did, but now he paid closer attention. The shadows, the patterns of light, even the way people moved, all provided clues. One night, he spotted two of them near the edge of town, arguing quietly about their next move. He didn't approach. He simply observed, memorized their positions, and let them reveal their weaknesses. Patience had always been his greatest weapon. At home, he strengthened his defenses further. He checked every door, every window, every entry point, making sure nothing was left to chance. But his preparations went beyond physical measures. He also planned psychologically. He understood fear, manipulation, and control. He knew that people who relied on hatred often made predictable mistakes. By remaining calm and measured, he could guide the situation without ever needing to act violently. The clan, frustrated by their failures, became reckless. They tried to provoke him in public, leaving notes on his car, shouting from their trucks, and making threatening gestures. But he never lost his composure. Each act of aggression was studied and remembered. He knew they were showing him exactly how they thought, how they moved, and how they could be anticipated. Every mistake, every slip, every burst of anger became another advantage for him. Neighbors began noticing subtle changes too. He moved differently, spoke with quiet authority, and seemed to anticipate events before they happened. Some felt uneasy around him. Others admired the calm control he projected. They did not know his past, the skills he had honed over years of intense training, or the experiences that had taught him how to remain unshaken in the face of danger. They only sensed that he was not ordinary. One evening, the clan made a critical error. They tried to corner him near the edge of town, thinking numbers would finally give them the upper hand. But he had already anticipated this. He moved silently through the shadows, positioning himself strategically, using the environment to his advantage. When they arrived, they found that every path, every escape route, every angle had been accounted for. Their confidence faltered. He did not attack immediately. He let them reveal themselves through action, showing their recklessness and lack of planning. One stumbled, another froze, a third gestured in confusion. Their arrogance had been replaced by doubt, and doubt made them predictable. He could have struck then, but he chose to maintain control, to guide the situation in a way that minimized unnecessary conflict. As the nights went on, he continued to study them. He learned their routines, their weaknesses, and their fears. He began setting small traps, not physical but strategic. He used his knowledge to manipulate their movements, ensuring that they made mistakes even when they thought they were in control. Every misstep, every moment of hesitation was an opportunity for him to assert dominance without ever needing to resort to violence. The clan's frustration grew. They became paranoid, seeing threats everywhere, questioning one another, and making poor decisions. He observed silently, recognizing that the more they tried to control him, the more they exposed themselves. Their hatred had blinded them to their own weaknesses. Every day they were becoming easier to predict, easier to manipulate, and easier to control. Meanwhile, he continued his daily routines, keeping a calm exterior. At the shop, he greeted customers with a smile, repaired vehicles with skill, and maintained a friendly, approachable demeanor. Outside, he walked the quiet streets, enjoying small moments of peace, a bird singing, the sun rising, the faint scent of morning dew. These moments reminded him why he had chosen this life, why he valued calm, quiet, and simplicity. But he never let his guard down. He knew that the clan's next move could be dangerous, perhaps even deadly. He prepared mentally, reviewing every scenario, every possibility. He practiced patience and discipline, knowing that control of the mind was just as important as control of the body. He had learned over the years that people who relied on hatred were predictable, and that patience could turn their aggression against them. One night, he noticed subtle changes in the behavior of the clan. They had begun sending small signals, attempting to communicate with one another in secret, coordinating their next attack. But their attempts were clumsy, obvious to someone paying attention. He memorized their positions, the way they signaled, and the paths they took. Every detail was recorded, stored, and analyzed. He was ready. He also began to anticipate psychological tactics. The clan tried to intimidate him with rumors, false information, and attempts to sow distrust among neighbors. But he remained calm, measured, and focused. He knew that fear and uncertainty could be as dangerous as physical attacks, and he used his calm demeanor to counteract their attempts. By remaining unshaken, he controlled the narrative without needing to confront them directly. Neighbors started to notice the change in the clan as well. The once confident group now seemed nervous, hesitant, and disorganized. Their attempts to intimidate were failing, and their own fear was showing. Some neighbors whispered about the quiet man who did not react, who seemed to see everything, anticipate everything, and remain calm under pressure. He did not seek attention, but his presence alone was enough to influence those around him. By now, the clan had become obsessed with him. They could not understand how their harassment had failed. They had underestimated his skill, his intelligence, and his patience. They did not know that he had faced danger far greater than anything they could imagine, that he had trained for situations far more intense than this, and that he had survived through calm observation and strategy. He had turned the situation into a controlled environment. Every movement of the clan was predictable, every plan they made could be anticipated, and every attempt to intimidate him only revealed more about their weaknesses. He had learned how to turn their own aggression into an advantage, and he remained calm, observing, and ready. Then came the day when the clan tried a more direct approach. They attempted to corner him in public, hoping that embarrassment and numbers would force him to act rashly. But he anticipated this. He used the environment, positioning himself strategically, and allowed them to reveal their mistakes. One tripped, another hesitated, and a third lost focus completely. Their plan collapsed without a single strike from him. He did not need violence. He used observation, patience, and subtle guidance to control the situation. The clan realized too late that they had been outmaneuvered. Their arrogance had been their downfall. Every step they took, every action they made had been anticipated, and their failures had become their own undoing. By the end of this period, the clan was fractured, fearful, and disorganized. Their hatred remained, but it was tempered by fear of the man they had underestimated. Meanwhile, he maintained his calm, quiet life. He continued his routines, worked at the shop and walked the streets, all while remaining alert, aware, and prepared for the next challenge. He had turned the game in his favor without resorting to unnecessary conflict. He had demonstrated that skill, intelligence, and patience were more powerful than numbers, arrogance, or hatred. And he knew that the final confrontation would come, but when it did, he would be fully in control, prepared, and ready to ensure that justice and safety prevailed. The tension in the town had reached its peak. The clan had grown reckless, their arrogance replaced by desperation. They had tried to intimidate him in every way they could imagine, and each attempt had failed. Their frustration was obvious, their planning sloppy, and their fear growing. But the quiet man at the center of it all remained calm. He had anticipated this escalation. He had prepared for every scenario. He was ready. It began with small signs: a shadow moving where it shouldn't, a door left slightly ajar, a note slipped under a shop door. Each act was a test, a probe to see if he would react. He observed, measured, and recorded everything as he always did. But now he knew it would soon reach its climax. The clan wanted confrontation. They wanted chaos. And he would give them clarity instead. The first encounter that day was subtle. Two men approached the shop, pretending to be customers, asking questions and trying to provoke. They wanted a reaction, something to show the others that he could be rattled. But he remained polite, calm, and friendly. He answered their questions with careful precision, keeping his tone neutral. Yet behind his eyes, he noted everything: the way they moved, their gestures, and the way their eyes darted nervously when they thought he wasn't looking. Later, as he left the shop for the evening, he noticed them gathering near the edge of town. Their confidence had returned, fueled by numbers and impatience, but it was flawed. He had studied the terrain, memorized every path, and considered every escape route. This was the moment he had prepared for, not for revenge, but to end the threat efficiently. He moved silently, blending with the shadows, unseen and unrecognized. They had no idea that the quiet man they had targeted for weeks was not only aware of their every move, but fully capable of neutralizing the danger they posed. Their arrogance had blinded them, and that would be their undoing. As they spotted him, they attempted to surround him, to intimidate and force a reaction. But he was already several steps ahead. Every move they made was anticipated. When one lunged forward, he sidestepped smoothly, redirecting the man's momentum so he stumbled into the others. Another tried to block his path, but he guided him away with a quick twist and light shove, enough to unbalance but not harm. The clan's confidence cracked instantly. They realized too late that they had underestimated him. Each mistake they made only widened the gap between their expectations and reality. He had trained for situations far more dangerous, faced opponents far more skilled, and survived challenges that required calm, patience, and intelligence. Now that training was on full display, but he did not act recklessly. He controlled the situation with precision, using the environment to his advantage. A fence, a parked car, and even the shadows became tools in his strategy. He moved with efficiency, each step calculated, each motion deliberate. He did not need to shout, to threaten, or to harm unnecessarily. Control and observation were enough. One by one, the men faltered. They tripped, froze, and argued among themselves, realizing that they were outmatched not by strength but by skill and composure. The quiet man had turned their own aggression into their downfall. His calm presence was overwhelming, and their panic only grew. Then came the moment of revelation. One of them, frustrated beyond control, shouted, "Who are you? What are you?" For the first time, he allowed a hint of his true identity to surface, not through words but through action. The precision, control, and unshakable calm he displayed were the marks of a professional far beyond their experience. They began to understand too late that the man they thought they could threaten was not ordinary. He guided them carefully, ensuring that no one was seriously harmed while neutralizing the threat entirely. Each movement forced them into positions of disadvantage. He demonstrated that strength alone could not win battles. Strategy, patience, and intelligence were far more powerful. By the time the confrontation ended, they were disoriented, frustrated, and completely aware of their own mistakes. After the clan scattered, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. The immediate danger was over, but the lesson had been delivered. He had shown that threats could be handled calmly, efficiently, and decisively. It was not about revenge. It was about control and survival. The town had been spared unnecessary chaos, and the clan had been taught their place without permanent harm. In the days that followed, the town noticed a shift. The once bold and aggressive clan had become cautious, hesitant, and respectful. Their arrogance had been broken, replaced by fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, he returned to his routines at the shop, walking the streets quietly, helping neighbors subtly, and maintaining the calm life he had chosen. People began to see him differently, not as an outsider, but as someone capable, trustworthy, and commanding respect without demanding it. He also reflected on the events internally. It was a reminder of why he valued patience and intelligence over aggression. Had he acted in anger, had he allowed emotion to control him, the outcome could have been very different. But calmness, preparation, and strategy had ensured that the threat was neutralized efficiently, without unnecessary conflict. It was a lesson he carried with him from his past, one that guided his every decision. Neighbors began to notice his quiet vigilance. Some whispered about the events that had unfolded, curious about how one man could handle so much danger without panic. Others were grateful, though they did not fully understand the skills and experiences that made him capable. Still, his reputation grew quietly, not through boasting but through action and example. The clan, having learned their lesson, became a shadow of their former selves. They no longer threatened, no longer harassed, and no longer dared to challenge him directly. Their fear and respect were evident in subtle ways, glances that avoided his eyes, whispers that ceased when he approached, and careful, cautious behavior that marked a profound change in their attitude. He knew that true control was not about dominance through force, but through awareness and strategy. He had survived, protected himself, and restored balance without unnecessary violence. That was the mark of someone trained, experienced, and disciplined, a man who had faced real danger and understood how to navigate it. In the quiet moments, walking through the streets, he allowed himself to feel peace. The town, once tense with fear, now moved with a quiet sense of normalcy. People greeted him, unaware of the full story, but feeling the calm assurance that he carried. He continued to work at the shop, repair vehicles, and live the life he had chosen. Simple, focused, and deliberate. Looking back, he knew that the threat had taught valuable lessons. The clan had learned humility. The town had seen the value of calm, prepared leadership, and he had reinforced the principle that intelligence, patience, and strategy often outweigh aggression. Survival was not about confrontation alone. It was about understanding, anticipating, and acting at the right moment. Over time, he became a quiet protector of the community. People respected him, sought his guidance in small ways, and felt safer knowing that someone capable and watchful was among them. He did not seek recognition, nor did he desire it. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that danger had been neutralized, lives had been protected, and the town could continue in peace. He still moved carefully, observing shadows, noting patterns, and maintaining awareness. His past had taught him that complacency could be dangerous. But now, he did so with confidence, knowing that he had demonstrated his abilities when necessary and that the clan would not challenge him again. The threat had been resolved, the danger neutralized, and the balance restored. The town, for the first time in weeks, felt normal. Children played outside without fear, neighbors walked freely, and the quiet streets held no sense of menace. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle respect for the quiet man lingered. People could sense that he was no ordinary person, that he carried a presence of calm authority, and that he had faced challenges they could never imagine. In the end, it was not violence but patience, intelligence, and careful observation that had ensured safety. The clan had been humbled, the town had been protected, and he had preserved his quiet life while asserting control over the threat. It was a triumph not of strength but of skill, discipline, and awareness, a quiet victory that resonated far beyond the events themselves. As he walked through the streets, he allowed himself a small smile. The danger was over. The clan had been dealt with, and life could continue peacefully. He had proven that calm intelligence and strategy could overcome hatred and aggression, and in that calm, deliberate victory, he found the peace he had sought when he first arrived in the town. A life of quiet, purposeful living, safe from the threats that had once loomed over him.